Hey, before we get going, I want to talk about this awesome shirt. It's soft, it's comfortable, it comes from Into the AM. Fine purveyors of unique, well-made graphic tees and elevated menswear with whom I have a partnership. So when you shop at Into the AM using the link in the description, or if you use code Grouchy when you check out, you're not only going to save 10% off your order, but you're also going to help support this channel, and I like that very much. IntoTheAM.com/Grouchy or use code Grouchy when you check out. The Grouchy Nerd. Alright, you antisocial weirdos, it's time to learn a game that plays at the ideal player count. 20 Strong, designed by Josh J. Carlson and published by Chip Theory Games, is a dice pool management solitaire game which sees you as all kinds of stuff, because 20 Strong isn't just a single game, but rather a game system. So you'll need the base set of 20 Strong dice and any one of the 20 Strong decks. So I'm going to show you how to play 20 Strong using the Solar Sentinels deck because it's the simplest, it has the fewest extra rules to it, but you can take these rules and apply them to any of the 20 Strong decks and have a grand old time. In all cases, the game is played over a series of rounds, and in most cases, your goal in 20 Strong is to defeat a final boss at the end of the game. To do so, you'll activate and engage conflicts, committing, rolling, and applying dice in hopes of dealing enough damage to defeat the conflict. But settle down there, hotshot. You're gonna have to show some semblance of restraint because you only get a limited number of those dice back at the end of each encounter. And my goodness, is that a difficult line to ride. I overextend. Every time. First, gather the eponymous 20 dice. 17 make up your dice pool, but these 3 are used to track your stats. Set them aside for now. Dice in your dice pool have 3 possible results: miss, basic hit, and crit. Basic hits and crits are both considered hits, with basic hits dealing 1 damage and crits dealing 2, though still only counting as 1 hit. Each die has exactly 1 crit side, but the strength of the die, corresponding to its color, is based on how many of the remaining sides are hits or misses. Yellow dice have 1 basic hit and 4 misses. Greens have 2 basic hits and 3 misses. Blues have 3 basic hits and 2 misses. Purples have 4 basic hits and 1 miss. And the red die, of which there is only 1, has 5 basic hits and 0 misses. And if you forget, or if you just have a hard time with colors, the number of pips around the circle on each side of the die is the number of sides of that die that are hits. So the green die has 3 pips, for instance. That's 2 pips for regular basic hits and 1 pip for a crit. Choose which deck to play, which will determine how the rest of the game will set up. In the case of Solar Sentinels, it's very simple. Shuffle the 45 conflict cards and set them in 3 face-up piles of 15 cards each. Then shuffle the 4 boss cards and set them aside face down. In Solar Sentinels, all of the conflict cards are enemies, some kind of bug, like a shiny buggy looking thing, and all your turns will come in the form of attacks, rolling dice to deal damage equal to or in excess of the enemy's health, the value in the, I guess, drop of blood icon. In addition to its health value, enemies have a name, a level, either 1 or 2, with level 1 cards being generally easier to defeat than level 2 cards. Most will have an effect, how much damage it does to you if you don't defeat it, and the reward if you do. Effects with this during symbol will change the rules of engagement in some way while that card is active, like barring the use of certain dice or changing the value of certain results. After effects marked with this symbol aren't resolved until combat is over and are resolved regardless of whether that enemy was defeated. And special effects, those with this star icon, can vary between 20 Strong decks. In Solar Sentinels, all special effects are resolved only if and when that enemy is defeated. Rewards can be instant, marked by this lightning bolt, that are gained as soon as the enemy is defeated, or item rewards that aren't gained until combat is over, and will either be single use, marked with this V thing, or ongoing, noted by the infinity. The boss cards can stay out of play for now. You'll need to deplete at least one of the stacks of enemies before you can choose to face the boss, but we'll come back to that later. Choose your hero. Each of the 3 hero cards in Solar Sentinels is double-sided, so you have 6 heroes to choose from. I'm going to use Valkyrie Mark 7 because she's kind of the most basic hero. Heroes have a name, an ability, and starting stats: health, strategy, and recovery. Your health is how much damage you can take from undefeated enemies. If your health would ever go lower than 1, you immediately lose the game. Your strategy value is the number of items you can hold as well as the number of attempts you can make to defeat each engagement. And your recovery value is how many committed dice you can take back at the end of each encounter. Place the 3 stat dice next to your hero card and set each to the starting value listed on your card. As you gain rewards and take damage, these values will change. You'll use the dice to keep track, so none of your stats can ever be more than 6 or less than 1. Well, your health can be less than 1, but again, that just means you lose. Valkyrie's stats start at 3 health, 2 strategy, and 2 recovery, but she has a setup instruction that says to increase her stats by a total of 2, so I'll just make all 3 stats 3s. The remaining hero cards, the chip counter, and for now the 12 mission cards can go back in the box. Missions are not recommended as you're getting to learn the game, but we will go over how they work at the end of the video. Also, I'm going to be using a dice tray in the video. That does not come with the game. I'm just using that because trying to record a video when dice are involved is super annoying. They go everywhere, they knock the cards all over the place. It's terrible. But I will put a link in the description if you like it and you want to use the one I'm using. They're really nice to have for dice games. Each turn plays thusly. Every round of 20 strong will have the same basic structure. You'll activate a card, then engage that card in a series of strategy phases up to your strategy stat. In each strategy phase, you'll commit, roll, and apply dice to that card to deal damage. Then in the resolve phase, undefeated enemies attack and you'll exhaust your committed dice. Then you'll recover exhausted dice equal to your recover stat. You got all that? You want to slow it down? Yeah, let's slow it down. Activate a card. Now, most 20 strong decks will have different rules for which cards can be activated at what time, but in Solar Sentinels, again, it's very easy. You'll choose and activate the top card of one of the stacks of enemies. In general, you can choose any top card, however, enemies with orange text and stripes are mandatory enemies. If one or more of the stacks has a mandatory enemy on top, you must choose one of them to activate. Place the chosen card in the active area. Some enemies will bring an additional enemy or enemies into play with them, noted by this angry skull symbol. You'll again choose one of the cards from the top of one of the stacks, and again, you must choose a mandatory enemy if one is present. And if that enemy brings another enemy into play, you'll just have to keep going. And if that's what your very first activation looks like, just start over. Just reshuffle the cards. No one's gonna know. That's terrible. Instead, let's look at a pretty ideal first encounter. We'll say we got lucky and started out with this Lost Sentinel, which only has 3 health, so I need to do 3 damage to it. Check the active card for effects, especially those with this during symbol, which affect gameplay immediately upon activation. In this case, we cannot use green dice. Now, engagement begins with the first strategy phase. The strategy phase is the main gameplay phase of the game, when you're rolling dice and applying damage to enemies, and you can repeat this step as many times as is your strategy stat every engagement. So as long as that strategy stat is more than 1, you'll likely be rolling dice multiple times every time you activate a card. First, commit dice from your dice pool to the engagement. Generally speaking, and unless indicated otherwise by an active conflict card, as in our example, there is no limit to the number or color of dice you can commit. Right now, that means no green dice, but everything else is on the table. Remember, basic hits count as 1 damage and crits count as 2, so I could try to beat this guy with only 2 dice. But my recover stat is 3, so I'll get 3 dice back at the end of the engagement, so there's no reason not to commit at least 3. And I might as well commit 3 of my best dice, the 1 red and 2 purple. Next, roll the committed dice. I rolled 1 hit on the red and 1 on a purple, but I missed with the other purple. Now I can apply dice to the conflict card to indicate the hit. I'll apply the purple that hit by placing it on the Lost Sentinel card. But I'm going to hold off on placing the red die. It did hit, but that's technically the worst outcome for the red, so I want to try it again. And that's one strategy phase over. I committed, rolled, and applied dice. Valkyrie's strategy stat is 3 though, so I get to do that 2 more times if I want. I still have this creepy little guy, so yeah, I do want. When you begin a new strategy phase, the dice you've already committed have to stay committed. but you're free to commit as many more dice to the engagement between strategy phases as you want, so I'll grab both other purples. Applied dice stay applied until the engagement is over, even if the enemy they're on has been defeated. Now roll all other committed dice. Meaning if you rolled a hit and for some reason you didn't want to apply it just yet, you can't hang on to that hit. You have to re-roll that die as well. And I absolutely crushed the little creep. So I'll apply this crit, doing 2 more damage for a total of 3. The enemy is defeated. Turn it 90 degrees to indicate its defeat. Remember, this also negates during effects, so if there had been another enemy in play, I would also now be free to use green dice. Also, it's probably not going to come up much, but you can choose to overkill a card. You can just keep applying hits to a defeated enemy, which might matter with some card effects. Spoilers. This enemy also had an instant reward which I get immediately upon its death. In this case, I'll get to add 1 to my recovery stat, making it 4, and discard a level 2 card from the stacks that I don't feel like messing with. However, if that reward had been an item, I wouldn't get it just yet. The resolve phase is last. Undefeated enemies now get to attack. We killed our enemy, but if we pretend we didn't, it would do the value in this starburst shape in damage to us, in this case 1. To reflect damage done to you, rotate your health stat die to find the correct value. Next, resolve any effects on cards in the active area with the after icon. And remember, unlike during effects, after effects get resolved regardless of whether that enemy was defeated. Then exhaust your committed dice by moving them to an area that is physically separate from your dice pool. And if a card ever tells you to banish a die or dice, that doesn't mean they go to the exhausted area. Banishing means they're out of the game completely. Next, clear the active area. If you defeated an enemy with an item reward, you may now take it into your inventory. Remember, you can hold a number of items equal to your strategy stat. All rewards are optional, and you can use or discard one to make room for a new one. Once an item is in your inventory, it can be used at any time. When you use an item with a one-time use icon, it goes in the same discard pile as defeated enemies. Items with the ongoing icon stay in your inventory until you choose to discard them. Undefeated enemies and those with instant rewards you've already received or rewards you don't wish to receive go into the discard pile. Then recover exhausted dice equal to your hero's recover stat, placing them back in your dice pool. So in this case, my recovery stat is 4, so I'll take 4 dice back, leaving just 1. And the very last thing you do in each round of Solar Sentinels is discard 1 card from the top of one of the stacks. However, in this case, you cannot choose a mandatory enemy. If all visible enemies are mandatory, you'll skip this step. And that one, so we're clear, is not a 20-strong rule. That's just for Solar Sentinels in particular. Then begin a new round by activating a new card. If there's a mandatory enemy, you must choose that enemy, bringing in additional enemies as needed. Engage the active enemies in a series of strategy phases by committing dice from your dice pool, rolling and placing them up to as many times as your strategy stat, adding to your committed dice if you wish between each attempt. Remember that if you defeat an enemy with a during effect, that effect is no longer active. After your final strategy phase, surviving enemies attack and after effects are resolved. Move all committed dice to the exhausted area. Then gain any item rewards and discard any other enemies in the active area. Recover exhausted dice equal to your recovery stat, and discard a non-mandatory card from the top of one of the stacks, then begin again. At the start of any round in which at least one stack of enemies is empty, you can choose to face the boss. At the start of any round in which all 3 stacks of enemies are empty, you have to face the boss. If a boss is already revealed, activate it. If not, activate 1 boss at random. Each will bring an entourage of additional enemies into play with it. If there are still stacks, activate the entourage as normal, prioritizing mandatory enemies, though entourage enemies do not bring in additional enemies of their own. If there are not enough enemies left in the stacks, shuffle the enemy discard pile and deal them out from the top. Endgame rounds work slightly differently than standard rounds. You'll take your turn as normal, taking as many strategy phases as your strategy stat will allow. However, in endgame rounds, when you get to the resolve phase, undefeated enemies stay in play after they attack you. And worse, when you get to the exhaust dice step, if you applied dice to an enemy but were unable to defeat that enemy, those applied dice are exhausted as well. Though some bosses in Solar Sentinels, like this one, let you off the hook on that. Defeated enemies still clear though, so you can take any item rewards into your inventory. If you survived the attack, you'll recover exhausted dice as normal and begin a new turn, this time skipping the activation step. Play continues in this way until either you or the boss is defeated. Unless otherwise stated, if you defeat the boss, you win, even if there are still enemies left in its entourage. Otherwise, you lose if at any time your health would go below 1. Now, once you're a bit more comfortable with the game, you can add in missions, which are extra challenges you'll try to accomplish throughout the game, like ending a round with only one hit point, or activating 3 or more enemies in one activation. During setup, you'll shuffle the 12 mission cards and deal yourself 4, making a line above the play area. Choose one of them to discard, leaving the other 3 in the order in which they were dealt. Then set the chip counter next to the leftmost mission, which you'll use to keep track of your progress. Oh, and one more thing, you have to accomplish these missions in order from left to right. So if you have a lineup that looks something like this, you'll have to defeat these 4 level 2 enemies before you can work on these 6 level 1 enemies. When a mission is accomplished, flip it over and move on to the next one. And you have to accomplish them all before you get to the boss, because if you activate the boss with unaccomplished missions still in play, you're going to have to add an enemy to the boss's entourage for each unaccomplished mission. But you can choose to do that on purpose. If you have a mission that you don't think you're going to be able to accomplish and you just want to move on to the next one, you can choose to skip that one, but just know that it will become an extra enemy, making the end of the game that much harder. Alright, now that's how to play 20 strong using the Solar Sentinels deck. Now get out of my dice pool. We've used that one before.
The Grouchy Nerd.
20 strong? Wasn't that my nickname in college? Alright. Seems like you're laughing a little too hard at that. I said it seems like you're laughing a little too hard at that. Okay. I don't like how